In the Gun, episode 81. I'm Schuyler Callihan. Here with me today is the signal caller, Jed Drenning, and it is Phil Thursday, so we will have Phil Steele college football talk coming around the corner here after our break. But before we do that, Jed and I, we're going to dive into some over and unders for this week's game between West Virginia and Duquesne. But before we even do that, a word from our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is your number one source for all your betting needs to get the latest odds, lines, and matchup reports for baseball, boxing, golf, and more. BetOnline continues to be the best and easiest way to place your wagers, including live betting and your favorite casino and card games available to play right from your phone. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and get in on the action. Remember to use the promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online where the game starts. And Jed, this one this week should be a cakewalk for West Virginia. We kind of talked about it throughout the week already. I'm sure you guys are going to talk about that on the game preview tomorrow. But this one, it's such a large point spread, so you really can't sit here and get too deep into it. So what we're going to do to get things started is talk some over and unders. What's going to actually hit, what won't. Jed, you came up with some of these. If you want to go and get it started, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I'm kind of geeked to pick Phil's brain and get his thoughts on Colorado last week and some of the craziness that unfolded across the college landscape. But yeah, I was just thinking about this. So I came up with some of these, and I wanted to get your opinion. For instance, in the last 3 years, the JMU one-off in 2019 was kind of a different animal. And he was just in the saddle. It was a transition roster for West Virginia. JMU was really getting ready to make that leap to FBS football. That hard-fought 20-13 game. Let's look at the last 3 years against these FBS opponents with Neil Brown. In the last 3 years, for starters, this is the question I wanted to ask you. West Virginia scored 65, 66, 56. Now, if you average that 20 points against JMU in there, Neil Brown's 4 games against FCS opponents has been just a tick under 52 points a game. So I wanted to ask you, West Virginia against Duquesne, over under 51.5 points offensively.
I mean, I think it would be easy to take the over. But I think when you look at some of those games, like the Long Island game was just such a mismatch. I mean, that's a team that's still rarely, kind of fairly new to the whole college football thing, so they're still kind of getting going. Towson, they were completely overmatched. Again, James Madison fought in there, but Eastern Kentucky, that's a tough one too. They've had some good teams over the years, but I'm actually going to go. No, I'll go over. I think I'll go over, but I can see where this game, maybe West Virginia gets up by 3 or 4 scores in the first half, and you see a bunch of 2s, 3s, and 4s in there, and they hang around in the high mid to high 40s. But I would go over.
I agree. I'm going to go over with that, especially in consideration the last 3 games for different reasons. West Virginia put them away and was able to score a lot. But I'm hoping there's production. First of all, let's get to the point we're playing the 2s and 3s. That's goal number 1.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping there's production out of those 2s and 3s once they get in there and they have an opportunity to make some plays. So I'll take the over there too on that one. Okay, a year ago, here's another over-under. A year ago against Towson, our starting quarterback, JT Daniels, before getting pulled, we had 4 quarterbacks with scoring drives in that game.
Wow.
If you remember, but JT threw for 174 yards and then left the game. Garrett Green, over under 173.5 passing yards.
I think I'm going to go under here, and it's not because I don't think they're going to struggle in the passing game, but I think they're really going to look to get that running game going, because they really didn't get that opportunity against Penn State just because they fell behind in the second half and really couldn't stick to it. So I'm going to go under, mainly because they want to get that running game going. You get all 4 backs involved. I think if Jaheim White is healthy and practicing this week, I think we maybe even see him at some point too. So I'm going to say they get him in, get him out, get a nice couple of clean drives, and he'll stay under that total.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm going to go with the under there too. I mean, hopefully, ideally, these games, I always hate these games because they say the pride comes before the fall. I remember the West
Yeah.
Virginia team that won the Orange Bowl was losing to Norfolk at halftime. We'll talk about that in a preview tomorrow. But you got to take care of your business. But in an ideal world, I can almost see a game where Garrett approaches that number and maybe most of his production in the past games on a couple big plays, that type of thing. That's kind of the script that I'm hoping for if we come out and take care of business. So, and then finally, the third one before we go to break here. Defensively, West Virginia in each of these last 3 FCS games, Towson, Long Island, Eastern Kentucky, they've managed only 1 takeaway. We forced 1 turnover in each of those 3. So against Duquesne on Saturday, West Virginia's defense over under 1.5 takeaways.
I really want to go over here because I think this staff has done a really good job preaching and trying to force these guys to start making some plays, and not just the routine plays. I think it was Shadon Brown and some of the other defensive staff members that have talked about that, just not making the routine plays, but actually making plays. And these are the games you kind of want to start taking those chances, just because you have the talent to kind of overcome that if you miss on one. But I'm gonna go with they get 1 again. I think this is a game where Duquesne, if they fall behind, they're going to try some things, but they're going to keep it clean. I think they're going to stick at 1.
This one, I'm actually going to go over. There was, again, a premium stress on turnover production defensively. The truth is, every staff in America spends camp talking about forcing turnovers. But what's your strategy to get there? Get them off schedule. You can get them in adverse down and distance situations on 3rd down. I think we're going to have some success doing that. Not only did West Virginia not force 1 last week, but Duquesne didn't commit 1 last week. So I think those 2 things are going to meet. Duquesne's a little due, and West Virginia so desperately needs it. I think we're going to apply pressure. Again, when you look at the production that we had from a pass rush standpoint against Penn State, 9 hurries, 7 quarterback hits on Drew Aller, despite Drew Aller's success, which was bountiful. Drew Aller played a heck of a football game.
Yes, he did.
But he did do so under some duress against a very good Penn State offensive line. We managed to pressure him. So hopefully that pressure is a little more overwhelming for Duquesne. And I'm thinking downstream of that might be a couple turnovers. I certainly hope so. So I'm going to go with the over 1.5 turnovers. That, again, I just kind of arbitrarily made these up, right? I thought I was a little upsized, but for Phil, before we bring Phil on.
Yeah, I like it. I like all these different ways we can try and beat each other up, whether it's the weekly picks or these. Maybe we have to do this every single week too, and see where we sit in the standings. We'll revisit this next week when we bring Phil back on, see how we did. Maybe we'll make this kind of a weekly thing. Jed and I will talk about that off air. But before we get to Phil, obviously this episode of ITG brought to you by our friends at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less than Grafton. Stick around in just 1 second. We'll be right back here with college football's best, Phil Steele, to break down the top 25 games and Big 12 games along with WVU here in week 2.
Nobody supports the Blue and Gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
All right, so it is time for Phil Thursdays here with Phil Steele, college football's best. We're going to be talking Big 12, top 25, and West Virginia versus Duquesne here with Phil Steele. You can go and get his preview magazine. Yes, the season already started, but you can still go get that magazine. There's a lot of obviously really good knowledge in there that you can still use throughout the entire season. You can get that at Books A Million. and Barnes & Noble. So, Phil, thanks for joining us for week 2 here at college football.
Hey, a real pleasure. I enjoyed the first one. Looking forward to the entire season.
Phil, let's jump right into some top 25 action. Obviously, we're going to get into the craziness that unfolded in week 1. But speaking of craziness, we have a top 25 matchup that involves Tulane in New Orleans hosting Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss squad. So walk us through your thoughts on that. And the darlings of last year, Tulane, here they come again early this season.
Yeah, and Tulane surprised me last week. I thought South Alabama was going to give them a game. They did for about 20 minutes. It was a close game, and then Tulane just pulled away, and they had a dominating yardage edge, 436 to 265. I like what I saw to Michael Pratt. Now, the big question I still have with Tulane is who's going to replace Tyjae Spears. Spears rushed for 1,581 yards last year. Last week, their top running back had 41 yards. So I'm still a little questionable on Tulane, and I don't think they're going to quite reach the levels they did last year. Now, with Ole Miss, when I talked to their coaching staff and after the spring was over, they said Jackson Dart was vastly improved this year, and he looked like it. Granted, they played Mercer in the opener, and Mercer wasn't going to give him much competition, but he looked good. I think they're going to unhook Quinshon Judkins this week. He only had 60 yards last week. Look for him to get more carries in this big game. I think Ole Miss is the better team, and even though Tulane's very tough at home, I'm going to call for Ole Miss to win this one by double digits.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Phil. I think that's going to be one of the better games this weekend. I like Tulane. They got a really good football team down there. Going to Power 5 versus Power 5 matchup here. You got Texas A&M at Miami at Hard Rock Stadium. This was a very low-scoring, ugly type game last year. That was 17-9. Do you kind of get the sense that that's what we're going to see again this year with these two stout defenses, or at least talented defenses, and maybe some marginal quarterback play?
Well, I think both teams' offenses are much improved this year. You look at Miami of Florida 2 years ago last year coming into the season, everybody was very high on Tyler Van Dyke. Van Dyke, of course, didn't have a great season with his new offense coordinator last year, only a 10-5 ratio. But the previous year, he had a 25-6 ratio, and Van Dyke has sort of melded in with this new offensive coordinator. They put up 493 yards last week, and very balanced attack, almost 250 yards both rushing and passing. When I talked to Coach Cristobal, he talked about how vastly improved that offensive line is. So I do think Miami's offense is better. And, you know, at Texas A&M, they got Bobby Petrino as the play caller now, and he's got a lot more talent to work with than they did last year. Last year when I talked to Jimbo Fisher, he kept saying, hey, we're going to have a great team next year. Well, it's next year. And they scored touchdowns on their first 5 possessions. Connor Wegman had a very good game, 5 touchdown passes, no interceptions. And New Mexico's actually got a decent defense. So that was a very good performance by A&M. Both these teams are on my most improved list. I think both are good play-on teams this year. However, A&M's had 5 great recruiting classes. Miami of Florida's had 2 great recruiting classes under Mario Cristobal. So I think their program's a little further ahead. I'm going to go with A&M minus the points in that one to win this one by about a touchdown or more.
And guys, if you're not familiar, you should make yourself familiar. Phil mentioned his most improved list. When you look at the history of what it means to make that list, that carries a lot of weight. Well, Phil, let's round out the top 25 by jumping into what was the biggest story, arguably, in college football in week 1. It sets up an old school matchup versus new school. You've got Nebraska heading to Colorado. You know, Colorado shocks the world with 87 fresh faces, a new coaching staff with Deion Sanders, goes into TCU in a shootout, knocks off the Horned Frogs, and they're hosting Matt Rule's Nebraska Cornhuskers after that tough loss to Minnesota. What do you see unfolding in Boulder in this incredibly intriguing matchup?
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head. Incredibly intriguing. I got to be honest with you. I didn't think Colorado was going to do very well this year with this massive change, but we saw last week they've got the talent level. I mean, Travis Hunter, Dylan Edwards look great. Shadur Sanders, fantastic game. And TCU is still a very good team, but Sanders just shredded them. So their offense looked unstoppable. Meanwhile, Nebraska had the game against Minnesota in hand. They were up by 7. About 5 minutes to go in the game, had the ball midfield. They fumbled. Minnesota went down, got a touchdown. Then after an interception, got the field goal to win it. but I thought Nebraska controlled the game. They had a 295, 251-yard edge. So I like the way the Huskers played. The key is going to be Jeff Sims. He had 3 interceptions last week. He can't afford to do that. He was sort of a turnover machine at Georgia Tech and looked the same last week. To me, this one is one that I'm just going to sit back and watch. Was it a mirage that we saw at Colorado, or are they really this good of a team? They're favored. Coming into last week, they would have been about a 10-point dog. Now they're a 3.5-point favorite in the game. I think it's going to be a great one to watch. I do side with Colorado coming out of there with the win, though.
Now we're going to move into our Big 12 slate here, Phil, and we'll kick things off with the Friday night game, Illinois at Kansas. And obviously, Kansas didn't have much of a sweat in week 1 there against Missouri State, but this is kind of seems like the first real test about what this team could look like. We saw Jalen Daniels healthy for the first 5 or 6 games last year. We saw what that team could do. What do you think about this game, and do you feel like Kansas can maybe put a whole season together with Jalen Daniels healthy there at quarterback?
Yeah, and that's going to be the big question here because they sat Jalen Daniels week 1 against Missouri State. You could do that. You're playing Missouri State. And by the way, Jason Bean is one of the best backup quarterbacks out there.
Yeah.
He showed it last year when he came off the bench at a 14-4 ratio, and he looked really good in this opener. But I think Kansas's chances to win this game probably do hinge on whether or not you're going to see Jalen Daniels play in this one. I think he will. I believe they just rested him last week to keep him healthy for this one. Now, Illinois is a really good team. I like what I saw to Luke Altmaier last week. He's an Ole Miss transfer. He had 69% of his passes. I didn't like the fact he was a team's leading rusher, and they needed a late field goal to get past Toledo. But Toledo's a really good team. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if Toledo won all the rest of their games this year. So don't be saying, oh, they barely got past Toledo. How are they going to beat Kansas? I think this is a great game. To me, this one's one of the toss-ups of the week. I'm going to have popcorn ready there, just be watching this game and learn about both teams. I think it's going to be a big-time toss-up.
And down in Waco, you got Dave Aranda's Baylor Bears are reeling. A shocking loss to Texas State last week. Blake Shapen's dinged up behind center. So the 12th ranked Utah Utes fresh off the big win against Florida. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a different Baylor this week. Baylor was not impressive last week, although they did have 524 yards offense. Shapen, I don't expect to play, so it'll probably be Sawyer Robertson in this one. But this is a circle the wagons game. Baylor has to have this. They can't open up the season 0-2, especially after losing their last 4 games last year. It's now a 5-game losing streak for Baylor. And for Utah, they're coming off a big high. That was a nice big win over Florida on a Thursday night. Massive game at home. But the one thing we've seen about Utah recently is at home they're unbeatable, but on the road they're about a 500 team. So I think it's a game where Baylor's going to take Utah all the way to the wire. Baylor's a big underdog in this one, and they're at home. It's going to be a circle the wagons game. I like Baylor as the underdog to keep it closer than expected and possibly even pull the upset.
How about the Cy-Hawk Bowl here, Phil? 3:30 on Fox. Me and Jed joke about this all the time about how very few points are going to be scored. I think we set the total for like 23 in this one, but that might even be too generous. Do you think we see some points in this game? And with all the stuff that's surrounding Iowa State right now, can they find a way to get one of these signature wins early in the season?
Those are big-time questions. You know, this game's gone under 16 of the last 18 years, so that's a pretty remarkable total right there. Yeah, it is. That is. You hit it right on the head. Iowa State, if you watch them last week, they jumped out to a 30-0 lead, and then Northern Iowa got the majority of their yards after that. So their defense is still top-notch, and Northern Iowa is a good FCS team. And, in fact, I put out an FCS magazine. We'll talk about that with Duquesne, but I've got 2 full pages on every FCS team. That's available on philsteele.com right now. And then you look at Iowa, they also jumped out to it. They scored touchdowns on their first 2 possessions last week, and then the offense sort of went away, and they only won that thing by 10 points against Utah State, only 284 yards offense. I do think it'll be low scoring. I do think it'll be close, but I got to give the edge to Iowa in the fact they've got the experienced quarterback in Cade McNamara over Rocco Becht. They've got the better running backs with Johnson and Williams. And I do believe they still have the better defense. They gave up some late yards to Utah State last week. So I think I was the better team playing with revenge. and the better quarterback. I'm going to call for Iowa to win this one by more than the spread, and I do agree with you, though. It will be a low-scoring game.
You talked about Utah being a different team on the road than at home. Well, last year, Phil, obviously the same held true with Texas Tech. For all the success they had in Joey McGuire year one, they were 1-4 on the road. Some of that reared its ugly head in Laramie, Wyoming, in that double overtime loss to open the season last week. Now they return home to Lubbock, and they're hosting the 13th ranked Oregon Ducks. I find this intriguing because obviously an offensive oriented football team in Texas Tech facing an Oregon team with a defensive culture, a head coach in Dan Lanning. So talk about that matchup for us.
Yeah, and Texas Tech, as you mentioned, last year 6-1 at home, so they were outstanding there, and it's a tough place to play. Lubbock is, it's a difficult travel, and so Oregon's going to have a much different test than they had last week against Portland State. Bo Nix hitting on all cylinders though, and last year, remember at the end of the year, Bo Nix was banged up, and that's when Oregon's offense dropped off a little. They lost that game against Oregon State, only scored 20 against Utah State. Now they're back full throttle. They looked great last week with 81 points against Portland State. And Texas Tech is a team that, if you in the magazine, I wrote about it. It was tough for me to grasp which team we're going to see this year. My power ratings had them anywhere from 4-8 all the way up to 11-1. They were a team that won a lot of overtime games last week, but it's a veteran team. A lot of seniors. Tyler Shuck is back. Remember, Tyler Shuck came from Oregon,
right?
So this is a big game for him, taking on his former team. I think it's going to be a great game, and you're going to see a much better Texas Tech team this week. But I still like Oregon to come out of there with the win, and probably by about a touchdown.
And then we've got the biggest game arguably in college football this week, and that's a future SEC matchup, Texas at Alabama. College game day will be there. Texas nearly won this game a year ago in Austin, but the good thing for them is they don't have to worry about Bryce Young on the other side to pull a late second comeback win. But again, when you look at Nick Saban's history against his former assistants, 28-2. I don't know if I can bet against Saban down there in Bryant-Denny. What do you think?
Yeah, and to me, the location's the key here, because if you look at Alabama football the last couple of years, they've struggled on the road. They've had losses to Tennessee, the near loss to Texas. They got beat 2 years ago by Texas A&M. They barely got out of the swamp in Florida, but they're outstanding at home. And remember last year, they were a 3-touchdown favorite on the road. Now this year, it's a circle the wagons game. They're going to have the home crowd. They're going to be fired up. And Alabama fans generally at home, I think if you follow them the last 5 years, they expect to win. But this game, there's some tension. So I think we're going to see one of the best Alabama crowds that we've seen. And I was impressed with Jalen Milroe last week. We knew he could run, and he showed that. But 3 touchdown passes, very impressive. And while Texas has a lot of talent, in fact, they're number 1 in my Big 12 power ratings, number 1 or tied for number 1 in all 8 position categories, I still think it's a much different game this year than last year. Last year, they should have won the game, but this year on the road, I like Alabama to win this one by more than a touchdown. I like the Tide to sort of put its foot down, and they do great in games against Power 5 teams in non-conference play, and I think we're going to see the best Alabama team here. I like Bama by double digits.
Double digit, wow. That's fascinating itself. So let's, as always, round things out here with West Virginia's matchup of the week, and the Mountaineers hosting the FCS level Duquesne Dukes. I think, Phil, what you're looking at a year ago, Duquesne was kind of uncharacteristically bad. They lost a lot of close games. They had several key injuries that they couldn't overcome. These games tend to be all about taking care of your business as early as possible and then rep as many guys as possible. How do you see this unfolding in Morgantown with the Duquesne Dukes making the hour-and-a-half trip down to Mountaineer Field?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the key to the game is West Virginia establishing its run early. They ran the ball well at times. I like that offensive line. It sort of looked like Neil Brown had talked to me about the offensive line last week. And that Penn State defensive line, as you know, I rank in the top 5 in the country. So it's one of the best defensive lines out there. I think the offensive line will assert itself early in the game. Now, Duquesne, even last year in a down year, did outgain Hawaii on the road, 364 to 184. So they played good in that game. They did lose their quarterback and wasn't blown away by Darius Parantis last week, just 7 of 13 for 54%. Taj Butts at running back did rush for 100 yards, but I think West Virginia will be able to assert its control early, get a nice big lead at the half. I've got West Virginia winning this game 45-6. I think maybe in the second half, fourth quarter, you're looking ahead a little bit to the backyard brawl next week, keeping your players fresh. But look for West Virginia's offensive line to be the dominant force here in this one.
Yeah, Phil, before we get you out of here, I just want to get your thoughts on what happened last week in Happy Valley. Obviously, West Virginia hung around probably a little bit longer than most anticipated, 14-7 at half. Penn State missed a couple of opportunities there in the second quarter with some missed field goals. But if West Virginia fans watch that game, I mean, what would your take be on that game? Should they be okay with that performance? Do you think it's a little underwhelming with the way things unfolded in the second half? What do you think about how things unfolded up there in Happy Valley?
No, I like the way West Virginia played. As you mentioned, 14-7 at the half. You have to be impressed with that. Penn State is one of the best teams in the country. Just look at my overall power rankings or ratings on the positions, and they're right up there. They go 3 deep on the defense, one of the best defensive line, linebacker, core secondaries in the country. So I thought West Virginia played well in the game to keep that close. If you're a West Virginia backer and you bet on West Virginia, you got to be a little dismayed about that touchdown with 1 second left. But other than that, I thought West Virginia played well, and I'm optimistic. I'm watching the game. I came away optimistic about the potential for West Virginia this year.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Phil, for joining us here for Week 2 preview, Big 12 Top 25 and WVU. Again, you can get Phil Steele's magazine at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Phil, thank you as always, and we'll chat again next week.
Yeah, a lot of fun talking football with you guys today. Have yourself a great weekend.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. All right, and when we come back from the break, we will wrap things up here on Phil Steele Thursday with Jed and myself. So we'll be back here in just one moment.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
All right, so that was some great stuff there from Phil Steele, as always, every Thursday here on In the Gun. And there's a couple of other games that we wanted to probably touch on, but we don't want to keep Phil here forever. So we're going to talk about a few other games going around the top 25 and Big 12 country. And for me, I'm going to start off with Appalachian State and at North Carolina. This game was a crazy game a year ago, 63-61. Carolina finds a way to survive that game. And I completely forgot about this fourth quarter that they had yet. App State scored 40 points in the fourth quarter alone. That is just insane. Yeah. This one is going to be interesting because App State did not look good at all against Gardner-Webb last week. It took them a very long time for them to pull away. Carolina, very impressive opener against South Carolina down here in Charlotte, in my backyard. This one's tough for me because App State's kind of like that small school team that I root for since I'm down here. It's where my wife's from. But she's a Carolina fan, so she's going to want Carolina to win. I think Carolina gets the victory. I think they win this one comfortably.
That game in Boone last year up in the mountains, bizarre.
Yeah.
But, I think the one common thread between last year's game and this year's game is Drake May. Drake May carved them up in a big way last year. He's going to carve them up in a big way this weekend, I would expect. And I think he's going to be the difference in what pushes them over top pretty decisively. I think so. I agree.
Yeah, NC State, Notre Dame, that's one that I think could get interesting. It is in Raleigh, and I can't remember if it was the last time these two teams played, but there was the hurricane that whipped through, and that was just a slosh fest in that game, low scoring game when they played that one. I think that may have been 2017 or 2018.
I think it was the
Um,
year we had our game canceled. It was the same hurricane.
yeah, that's right.
So
You are right.
2018.
Yeah, 2018. So this one will get a little bit drier weather. Actually, we don't know. There is some projected weather in the forecast, maybe. So we'll see what happens there. But Notre Dame, NC State, Sam Hartman, former Wake Forest quarterback. He's familiar with this NC State team, so that should be interesting. And what about this other Big 12 game here, Jed, that everyone should be watching?
Well, to double back to a closing thought on Notre Dame, it's interesting to me that Brennan Armstrong didn't look all that sharp against UConn. They had a sloppy
Yes.
start. He was
Yes.
the only thing they had in the run game. So unless they find a way to get things clicking in the pass game, North Carolina State, they might struggle offensively. But Sam Hartman, that matchup intrigues me. Sam Hartman through 2 games has been absolutely as advertised. 83%, 6 touchdowns, hasn't turned the football over with no picks. Gibby's going to dial up some looks. His whole goal was going to be and try and get in Sam Hartman's head. And Gibby's very good at doing that. So that's one I'm going to be keeping a close eye on. So that matchup intrigues me. But into the Big 12, we didn't mention the SMU Oklahoma matchup. It's intriguing to me only in that Rhett Lashley, he's got to back up what he's been saying, right? He's been talking about all this big move to a Power 5 conference and this type of thing. Well, Oklahoma is offensively firing on all cylinders right now. I mean, we saw how hot they were in the past game last week in that mismatch against Arkansas State. The run game, they're going to have balance. I think that they're going to be way too overwhelming for SMU. But this is one of those things that, is this the Oklahoma defense that we saw struggle last year? This is a Brent Venables coach team. Can he fix what's wrong and ailing the defensive side? Well, SMU offensively might test that with Rhett Lashley. So we'll find out if that's something to keep an eye on. I expect Oklahoma to win comfortably, but I'm more intrigued to keep an eye on Oklahoma's defense against the SMU offense.
It's not the backyard brawl, but it is the River City rivalry, Cincinnati at Pitt. And this one could be good news for West Virginia fans. I mean, Pitt, they've got to deal with another Big 12 team this week, and that's going to be no easy contest for them. They're going to have to will their way to win. And meanwhile, West Virginia is going to kind of get a tune-up game here against Duquesne. So Pitt and Cincinnati, I think this one could be a little bit interesting. And because I think Pitt, again, they could be looking ahead to West Virginia. They see Cincinnati as this new Big 12 team that's maybe towards the bottom of the league, and they still kind of view them as a retooling roster. I don't know. I think Cincinnati could sneak up on them. I think Pitt wins the game, but it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah, I think back to some of the classic battles that these two teams had in the old Big East. You know, the Wanstead, Brian Kelly era of the Big East, and some of the battles that they waged against one another. But it's intriguing. Only in Emory Jones played lights out. I think he played over his head against an overmatched opponent last week. He was 19 of 23. That's not the Emory Jones that I know.
Yeah.
So I can see him struggling against the Pitt defense. But Cincinnati, they're a handful on that defensive line, maybe the best defensive line in the Big 12. When you look at Dante Corleone, Jawan Briggs, they bring it. So they'll give you problems. You know, Phil Jurkovic looked comfortable settling in as Pitt's new quarterback last week. Of course, it's a system he played with, played in, I should say, under Signetti at Boston College. But I do think Pitt's the better team, and they're going to find a way to win this. But I could see Cincinnati being feisty enough to make it interesting. And I would imagine there's going to be a rabid crowd of probably, 2,600 or so cheering on the Panthers at Acrisure Stadium. Because anytime West Virginia is not playing there, it's not going to be many people. So, but yeah, I think Pitt finds a way to win this football game and heads into the backyard brawl unbeaten. It's just a matter. We were looking at it, Schuyler. Pitt's one of those teams getting votes. I think right now they're getting single-digit votes, which puts it like 30 or 31 technically. So it would probably be a bit of a long shot, even if they win decisively, for them to come into Morgantown ranked. It's more likely they'd come into Morgantown just outside the top 25 if they win decisively. But first, they have to find a way to win. So,
yeah, I heard they're having a gold rush for this week's game. That's the seats we're talking about here, not the fans wearing their gold shirts. But a couple other games I just wanted to briefly mention. We've talked about this before in some of our previews. Central Florida at Boise State. That's a very intriguing game. I know Boise State looked like crap last week against Washington, but Washington's, I mean, they're in contention for a big the Pac-12 title. You got the Battle of Houston and Rice. Houston with the shocking win over Utsa last week, 17-14, winning games a different way. And then how about this snooze fest? Oklahoma State and Arizona State. Talk about two teams that really just kind of fell asleep there in week one. Oklahoma State barely gets past Central Arkansas. Oklahoma State barely gets past, or Arizona State barely gets past Southern Utah. Who's going to win this one? I have no idea. It got to the point where in the Oklahoma State game, Mike Gundy threw his own kid in there. They had three different quarterbacks playing in that one. So yeah. I don't know what to expect in that game. Of those games, which ones kind of get your interest a little bit?
Probably UCF on the Smurf turf.
Yeah.
If anything. Again, John, big things are expected out of behind center for UCF. They're expecting him. When you listen to the staff, when you listen to Gus, when you listen to Herb Hand, they're expected to take the next step as a passer. I think it'll be enough of a test that we can probably tell something there.
Yep, so that will do it here for Phil Steele Thursday here on In the Gun. And one final thank you to Fortis for roof performance and financial security guaranteed. Make sure to visit fortis.us.com. Also, we have the West Virginia Duquesne game preview with Wes, Jed, and Owen. That will be dropping tomorrow, so be sure to subscribe on YouTube at In the Gun Podcast, and also on Twitter, follow at In the Gun Podcast, and be sure to be following the correct feed on Believe. That's, again, the one with Owen hurdling the guy from Rutgers, Devin McCourty. So that's it for us this week, or for today here on the show. For Wesley Euler, Owen Schmidt, Jed Drenning, I'm Schuyler Callihan. The one thing that we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. You've been In the Gun.